Thank you. You may be seated.
All right, good morning. How's everybody today? Are there any, check those kids leaving. Are they the right age? They're too old.
Looking too old.
Hey, last week's sermon was kind of funny. And so if it hit you the wrong way, if it rubbed a wrong nerve, or if you just feel like you wanted to talk about it, Ruth Ann's right here, she's available. You're not going to hurt me by sharing your opinion. Okay, I value your thoughts, I value your opinions, and I'd be happy to sit down and talk to you about whatever you'd like to talk about. All right? Is that okay?
Yep.
Were any of you here last week?
Yep.
Oh, okay, all right.
Must be we needed it.
Melissa, what did I forget? I can't hear you. John George in 6 days. That's Saturday coming up? Yeah. Okay, so what happens is we do a golf tournament. It's mini golf. It's not like golf at the John George home. John George is a center for men who really don't have any other options. And so these guys are there, and it's great to come in and just show them some love and be there to do a golf tournament. There are prizes, and so we need help with prizes. There are people who count, how many strokes it takes. The less accurate your count, no, that's not true. Accurate counting is good. And so there's an opportunity for us as a body of Christ just to wrap around these guys and show them some love. And cookies.
And gift cards.
And cookies and gift cards. And if you need someone to just make sure that your cookies are, up to par.
Yeah, no.
That's my responsibility. It's not easy. But it's what I do. Let's pray together as we get ready for this. Father God, I thank you for how awesome you are. Nothing compares to who you are and you done for us. And so, Father, as we approach this idea in your word, I pray that it would be clear and concise, Lord, that we would have opportunities to discuss ideas, Lord, without being offended, but rejoicing in the fact that we can be different people who are loved by one God, that we can be of different opinions, and yet still love one another. So help us, Father, as we look at your word, to do that, to truly create the community that we will enjoy forever in your presence. And thank you, Father, for all that you did in Christ's name. Hey, just another quick note, if you happen to be watching on Facebook, you can hit the like button or you can comment. This lets us know that you're there, and we count. If we don't know, we have to count you twice. We'll be a little bit all over. We'll be a little bit all over the Bible today, so there's some verses on the screen. It seems like everybody is offended about something. Have you noticed that in contemporary culture? That every time you turn around, somebody is stomping their feet and they're mad. Well, is that a biblical anger? Is that a righteous anger? Is that what people should be? And what does the Bible say? I mean, after all, Colossians says this: be wise in the way you act towards outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. And so I think there's a basic level of politeness that as Christians we're supposed to be very polite to people. That's a high bar. Sometimes we don't always meet that. And sometimes we unintentionally offend. I think I put Matthew 18:7 here. It might be attached. Woe unto the world because of offenses. For it must needs be that offenses come, but woe to that man by whom the offense cometh. Now that's the King James, right? Go King James. I use it on purpose. Because the word for offense in the original language can be rendered differently than offense. And we mean something quite different than what the original language meant. Woe to that man by whom the offense comes. Wow. How can I even open my mouth to say anything. Because there's a good chance if you have any opinion about anything, it's going to rub up against somebody's other opinion. So I use the King James on purpose. The NIV does a little bit better job when it says, "Woe to the world because of the things that cause people to stumble. Such things must come, but woe to the person through whom they come." So the NIV, a more modern translation, takes the idea of an offense, it's a stumbling, and it puts it into a closer rendering of the original. But what does it mean to stumble? Does it literally mean to trip and fall? Yes. But it also metaphorically means to trip up. And so we're going to examine that a little bit. Underlying all human relationships, and this is extremely important, underneath every relationship we have with every person in the entire world is the idea that they are created in God's image. We've talked about this several times before. You are created in God's image. You are created in God's image. You are created in God's image. Everyone is created in the image of God. And so we are obligated as followers of the one true God to respect the image in other people as best we can. So, how do we avoid insulting image bearers when it seems to be so easy to insult people? I encountered a person in my travels who was obviously female, but also obviously transitioning to male. I didn't know what to do. Because I want to be polite. If someone is going to get offended with me, I want it to be about who Jesus is and what Jesus says, so they come to faith in Jesus. Not that I create a barrier or an offense. And so I knew someone else, so we had a mutual acquaintance, and so I texted, I said, "Hey, am I understanding this correctly?" And my friend responded, "Yes, that's what's going on." Okay, I still don't know what to do, but at least I know what's going on. And how do I communicate basic respect for another person? And I don't even know which pronoun to use. It's a difficult and challenging world that we live in. I don't want to intentionally insult anybody, but invariably I'm going to. And how do we think about that? Jeff Jacoby, writing in the Boston Globe, says this: "Americans have lost their ability to shrug off other people's obnoxious comments or insensitive gestures or politically incorrect views. Instead of rolling their eyes and letting it pass, they proclaim, 'I'm offended.' They demand apologies. They insist on trigger warnings and safe spaces." How did we get here? How did we get somewhere where I don't even know how to talk to another person anymore because I don't want to offend? And what does offend mean according to Scripture? And if I do offend, what do I have to do with that? How do I practically navigate my relationship with other people, and specifically with believers? This could very easily balloon into a long series about human relationships. And I'm going to go on vacation. Before we start our fall series, it's just going to be interesting. But we won't be able to deal with all the ways we interact with people around us. We're only looking at the way that the word offense is used in the Bible. Because one of my big agendas is to make sure that we use the Bible carefully and intentionally. That we use all language carefully and intentionally. And how do we create a community of Jesus followers where we can talk about prickly subjects, ticklish issues, all those kind of things, in a way that we're not walking around mad all the time? I don't think that's what we're doing. And so how do we get so sensitive? Let's take a look at one of the things I am privileged to do is I get to read. So thank you for letting me read. And in some of my reading, I've encountered different ideas about how we got here. It's a consistent theme across several different authors. A woman named Laura Martocci wrote a book called Bullying, where she looks for the social origin. How did we get to a bullying culture? And she identifies this shift that reveals why offensive language and actions are having a different effect in the modern world. We've always been offensive. If you know anything about history, people were openly mocked, and yet they didn't have the kind of culture that we have. And so in the past, and even in our generations here, you can remember a time where we didn't have quite so much communication. How many of you are checking who texted? You know, we have so much communication and so much connection with the broader world around us, where in older times it wasn't that way. You know, who did you play with when you were a kid? The kids who lived in your neighborhood, right? And what were your neighbors like? You pretty much knew who they were. If you go back far enough, people walked to church. Okay? If you had to walk after, you would leave it. Okay? Give you praise. Someone who drive in for a bit. Thank you for doing that. In this past, where the social groupings were smaller, there was an agreed upon community method. People sort of knew what was expected of them, and we learned this on the playground, right? Don't do this, do that. We knew the boundaries of proper behavior and what to do when someone crossed those boundaries. And culture, all of the different elements of culture, our teachers, our parents, our pastors, they all reinforced this community value. Think for a minute about Leave It to Beaver. How many of you just got lost? Okay? Leave It to Beaver was a 1950s television program that for the first time in television history focused on the kids. So this is the 1950s, television is in the 40s, so television is in its infancy. And so now you have these two main characters are Wally, the older brother, and the Beaver.
The Beaver.
I corralled Rebecca Brady and made her watch an episode.
Bless you, Rebecca. And she's
And it was
watching.
great. She had never seen it before. And the premise of the show is that Wally and Beaver get in trouble, and then they mess it up, and then Mom and Dad have to come in and sort of help them understand where they went wrong, what they should have done, and how to do better in the future. Does that happen on television today? I think in television today, the kids are always right. And so we've created a world that is in some ways very upside down culturally. And so let me just, there's an episode that I'll talk about. In the episode, The Black Eye, Beaver gets into a fight at school and comes home with a black eye. Well, what's the 1950s solution to having a black eye getting beat up at school? You have to respond to aggression. You have to, as a virtue of being a man, you are obligated to respond to aggression. And so Ward, Beaver's father, takes him into the garage, they put on boxing gloves, and Ward teaches the Beaver how to fight. And then there's a wrinkle, because Beaver got in a fight with a girl. And so now, Ward has taught his son how to fight a girl, which in the 1950s, you can't do. And so Ward is interrupted by a phone call, comes back to find that the Beaver has gone to confront this girl. Well, this is before cell phones. My wife can track me. She knows exactly where I am all the time. On purpose, right?
Yeah, you allow it. You push the button.
Trust me, but you can imagine in the 50s, how do you find your kids? You stand on the porch and yell. You get in your car and drive around. You got to go find them. And so the Beaver, in the meantime, he goes and he confronts this girl and he says, "Hey, do you want to fight?" And she says, "No." And he says, "Well, how about ice cream?" And so they go out for ice cream. It's a great solution, right? Hey, do you want to fight?
Nope.
How about ice cream? That's marriage 101 right there, right? I've avoided a lot of fights there. How do you respond to aggression? So Beaver learns to fight, goes out and gets ice cream with this little girl. And really what's happening here is that there are cultural norms at play. That television is reinforcing some pretty good values. Should we respond to aggression? Yeah, we should stop someone who is being aggressive. They don't do that. Should we fight girls? No, we should take them out for ice cream. Leave It to Beaver reinforced these common cultural values of the 50s. How would that play out now? We've lost the cultural framework that stands behind these conflicts that our kids get into. These conflicts that we get into. Laura Martucci again says the complexities surrounding any attempt to define and address bullying, as well as respond to its victims, are rooted in much larger cultural shifts and the new social issues they tread. And so what's happened is the world that existed in the 1950s doesn't exist anymore. There's no agreed upon response to aggression. Well, your kid should toughen up. Well, your kid should not be a bully. And so even the adults don't agree in this situation. We can't even agree on what to do with language that someone thinks is insulting. And the word offended gets used to demand that someone change something we don't like. And I found a blogger who lists several examples. You can't celebrate Columbus Day because that's offensive to the native peoples who were here in America, and you can't even say Native Americans anymore. You're supposed to say indigenous peoples, and you're supposed to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. I'm only 50 years old. I don't know what's happened to the world. It's confusing. You can't sit Indian style in school. You have to say crisscross applesauce, whatever that is. Have you ever thought about, like, you have a gun emoji on your phone? Do you know what happened to the gun emoji? It started in 2012. A pistol and a blunderbuss and a revolver. Now we can only use squirt. Because God forbid someone get triggered by a little picture on the phone. What's happened to the world? We've lost the framework by which we can make reasonable judgments about behavior, and it's descended to the point where we don't even know how to talk to each other. So gradually, culture shifted its focus away from the ethic of the community, where the standard for behavior was what the community said, and now it's shifted to, I get to decide. I get to decide what's right for me, right? All you good United Brother people say, Amen. I get to decide based on what? Right? This is the standard for behavior. This is the rule by which we govern our lives. This tells us right from wrong. And so we have a community ethic, but we live in a community where there is no framework. David Brooks says this, from an older tradition of self-combat, we move to self-liberation and self-expression. Moral authority is no longer found in some external objective good. It is found in each person's unique original self. Greater emphasis is put on personal feelings as a guide to what's right and wrong. It's that whole you do you thing. Do you see what's wrong with that? If you're honest with yourself, in the very quiet moments, it's just you. What does your heart want? The heart is deceitful above all else and desperately wicked. Who can understand it? That's Jeremiah 17. The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? Verse 10 says, I, the Lord, search the heart and examine the mind to reward each person according to their conduct, according to what their deeds deserve. So we live in a world where there's a you do you ethic. There's no common agreed upon standard. And the natural effect of this is that when someone does something that's wrong, you can't judge their standard of right and wrong. Because the standard of right and wrong has become what every individual wants. Send a bunch of those kids to public school. Send a bunch of the you do you kids to public school and then try to wonder why the world is such a mess. Everybody's offended, but nobody has a common framework to build a response to modern relationships among people who disagree. And how does this affect the church? We have a common framework in Scripture. So let's move from what's happening, this little historical survey of what's going on in the world. Let's move into what the Bible says about offenses. And this is where I'm going to be a nerd, and you're all going to be polite about it, okay? There's a shift in the internal ethic, but when we think about the Bible and what the Bible says about offense, we need to consult the dictionary. But not just any dictionary. We need to consult a dictionary that organizes words by semantic domains. Can I get an amen? You have to buy a vowel to get an amen out of you guys for that. So, and I heard you say in the quiet of your mind, I heard the word nerd being formed, or maybe it was the word geek, or maybe it was the word weirdo.
Were you offended?
No, not even that. But when you think about it, those words, the idea of semantic domains is simply this, that words can be grouped into families, and those families have meaning. So well, let me give you an example. Maybe this will help make it more concrete. Sometimes Ruth Ann and I were sitting in the house, and she's watching, some murder television show, which is very terrifying, and so I'm scrolling through, read it on my phone, and I find something that I think is funny. And so I just send it to her. I don't try to show her, I just send it to her. And sometimes she chuckles. Can you give me a chuckle? I'm questioning my whole world. Okay, can you give me a chortle?
A turtle?
A chortle. Okay, what's the difference? It's almost insignificant if there even is a difference. What if she just gives me a big smile? Or an eye roll? You see, now maybe the eye roll is a different semantic domain. It carries different meaning. Okay. Now if I send her something really funny, she laughs. Or she guffaws. I've heard the occasional snort. This is a different idea. So inside this domain, we've got the chuckle and the laugh, right? And maybe we've got the chuckle, the laugh, and the snort, and then there's the ruffle, right? Rolling on the floor laughing. That was for the kids. So there's this domain of humorous responses to something that's funny, and usually when I send her something, it's an irony. So a dictionary based on semantic domains uses numbers to identify the major domain and relevant subdomains. You use the same kind of categories every time you open the refrigerator. You open the refrigerator, what are you looking for? You're not looking for money. Open the food. Okay, suppose you have a hot dog, you open the refrigerator, what are you looking for? A condiment.
Mustard.
Right? Some sort of, so you're opening the door, you're looking for food, a condiment. Which condiment? Not ketchup. Ketchup is gross. Mustard and relish, right? Mustard and relish. That's what goes on a hot dog. Okay, so there's the semantic domain of food, the big category. There's the subdomain of condiment, and then there's the right condiments, mustard and relish. So when we look at the idea of offense in Scripture, when we look in the biblical domain for offense, there are two major word families. The first one is the proskopto family, that's Greek for offense. The second one is scandalizo. So scandalizo, you hear the word scandal in front of it, right? Something scandalous. Now these are verbs with similar noun forms, so we'll try to unpack these two big families that relate to the idea of offending another person in order to see what the Bible means when it talks about offense. The proskopto word group is about stumbling in either a literal or a metaphorical sense. So if I stumble, right, that's a literal use of the word. If I stumble into something else, that's a metaphorical use. If I stumble in my speech, that's still stumbling, right? So the word stumble can be used different ways. And this is the idea of semantic range. Okay? Words can be used for a range of meaning. Cool means neato, and it also refers to temperature that does not exist under the stage lights. Right? So cool. What else? Trunk. What am I talking about? Either the main woody stem of a tree, the elephant's nose, or something to hold my clothes, the back of my car. That's the idea of semantic range. So the word for stumbling can be used in a range of different ways, literally tripping over something, or as a metaphor for tripping and falling and suffering an injury. Any idea that the word represents is the idea the word represents is either the act of stumbling or even the injury you get from stumbling. If you fall down and skin your knee, the word stumble can refer to that injury. And it gets extended into the injury that you feel when someone does something against you, right? So take a look at 2 Corinthians. There should be some text on the screen. As God's co-workers, we urge you not to receive God's grace in vain. For he says, in the time of my favor I heard you. In the day of salvation I helped you. I tell you, now is the time of God's favor. Now is the day of salvation. We put no stumbling block in anyone's path, so that our ministry will not be discredited. We put no stumbling block in your path. Is that a literal use of the word stumbling block? No. Paul is not saying, I did not trip you. He's saying, I came to present the gospel to you. I came to talk to you about Jesus, how he came to earth, lived a sinless life, died on the cross for our sins. That's what I came to talk to you about. And so I tried to make sure that nothing got in the way of that one message. That's what the word here means. It's the proskauto word. Don't put anything that blocks someone's ability to believe in Jesus. So the idea of an obstacle in one's relationship with God, and here's let me back up. It's not a literal cause for stumbling, but it's a metaphor for something that creates a barrier in someone's pathway to Jesus. An offense causes someone to sin by unbelief. This is the kernel of the idea. An offense is not something that makes you feel bad. An offense is something that blocks your ability to follow Jesus. An offense is something that causes you to sin. And so I can't be offended sitting at home watching television unless it causes me to sin. Right? That's what the biblical word means, and that is the major use of the word. So the proskauto family is the idea of stumbling. It also occurs in Romans 14:13, and I'll just read this and keep going. Therefore, let us stop passing judgment on one another. Instead, make up your minds not to put a stumbling block or obstacle in the way of a brother or sister. And so in Corinthians, what's happening is Paul is saying, I didn't put any barriers to you coming to faith. In Romans, this is about believers working together to follow Jesus without anybody putting a stumbling block or a hindrance, without causing another believer to sin. So in Romans 14:13, Paul suggests that we not put a stumbling block in the path of another believer, and he uses both word families here. He uses the proskauto family, the stumbling block, and he also uses scandalizo in the same sentence. And so the idea here is a cause to sin thing. Make up your mind not to cause a brother or sister to sin. That's different than saying something that somebody doesn't like. Don't cause someone to sin. It really doesn't have a whole lot to do with not liking someone's sin. And so here again, there's a literal idea, so we're moving from the proskauto word family that I didn't treat exhaustively, aren't you glad? And we're moving into the scandalizo family, okay, which is a similar idea. It refers to a trap, like a mouse trap. Okay, we have a stumbling block on one side, we have a trap on the other, like Hinckley's Donuts. Right? That's a trap. I'll fall into that trap just about every time. Please don't bring me donuts. It can be used, so this word can be used for something that causes offense or revulsion. And one of the things in the Bible that offends is the cross of Christ. And so believers, we're not supposed to get in the way of anybody getting to that offense of the cross. Because people coming to Jesus is the number one job of any church anymore. The verb form of this word, scandalizo, is significant. It means to trap someone or to cause them to be trapped by sin. This is the major use of the word. To trap someone, to lead someone into an offense, is to cause them to sin. What kind of sin? Sin is something that you do. Right? Take a look at Matthew. It's Matthew chapter 18, verses 1 to 10. And let's read this with this new understanding, cause to sin, of this word offense, or the stumble. 18:1 says this, "At that time the disciples came to Jesus and asked, 'Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?' He called a little child to him and placed the child among them. And he said, 'Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, and whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me.'" And so what is Matthew talking about? How do you get right with God? Through Jesus by faith. You come to God through Jesus by trusting what Jesus has done and who God says he is. Now let's keep going. "If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to fall into the sin of unbelief, it would be better of them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea." He goes on, "Woe to the world because of the things that cause people to fall into sin. Such things must come, but woe to the person through whom they come. If your hand or your foot causes you to fall into the sin of unbelief, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life maimed or crippled than to have 2 hands or 2 feet and be thrown into eternal fire. If your eye causes you to fall into the sin of unbelief, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and be thrown into the fire of hell." And so what is he talking about here? The word is to stumble, the word is to offend, but the idea is to not believe that Jesus died for your sins. It's to fall into the sin of unbelief. "See that you do not despise these little ones, for I tell you, their angels in heaven always see the face of my Father." It's not about being polite or impolite. Now that's a different idea. We could have a whole other sermon about, are you supposed to be polite to people? Well, yeah, of course. But when can you be offended? When someone causes you to sin. When must you not offend? Well, ever. Because to offend means to lead someone else into sin. It's a serious rejection. It's not a bad thought. It's not even an unkind comment. It's leading someone into violation of their conscience or a violation of God's moral standards. I have a good friend who got married. He was younger than I am, so he got married, and I was asked to MC the wedding, or MC the reception. And I said, sure, I'd be happy to. And so, you're just kind of trying to keep things moving, trying to make sure nobody gets out of line. I guess if need presented itself, I would be the bouncer, right? You're looking at me skeptically. All right, okay, fine. Too warm and fuzzy to be the bouncer. That's okay. And so while I was there, we were at the reception. And during the reception, you had the speech by the best man and the speech by the bridesmaid, maid of honor. And so the best man gets up and he begins sharing a story, one of those back in the day stories. And it was a story about how he and the groom used to go out drinking. And how when they were drinking, they would talk about theology and Jesus. And someone came to me and said, you have to make them stop. Stop what? Talking about drinking? I guess they were offended, but they were using the word or the idea of offense wrong. The best man didn't lead anybody into sin. He wasn't promoting alcohol. He wasn't saying you should do this. He was saying we used to have great conversations about Jesus, and this is the context, the unusual context that we used to do it in. Folks, if there are young men talking about Jesus and theology, thank God. Because a lot of people don't talk about Jesus and theology. And I'm not promoting alcohol use or abuse at all. And so they wanted me to stop this guy. Stop him talking. Now, assuming that my description is correct, no one has been led into sin. No one is doing something that violates their conscience or prevents them from believing in Jesus. Someone just didn't like it. And so I tackled the best man and wrestled the microphone away from him and broke his nose. No, I didn't. Because there was no offense. What's happened is that the idea of offense, leading someone into sin, has been misapplied to situations that are not offensive. The response is out of proportion to the situation. Now, how should we respond when someone is being led to sin? If the best man is walking around handing little samples of alcohol to all the kids, then we tackle him. He's doing something wildly inappropriate. Who should we stop? If he's talking about it, it's an opportunity for parents to coach their children about how to be a good adult and about how maybe his behavior in one respect was questionable and in another respect, talking about Jesus is commendable. Hey kids, let's talk about Jesus. How should we respond when someone is led into sin? Tackle them. But don't do that. The concept is distinctly different from a situation where someone disagrees with us or says something we don't like. No one should be led into sin by someone's opinion. Dr. Marty Nemko in Psychology Today says this: we're getting offended by the wrong things. Especially important, society would be better if we appreciated rather than got offended by criticism. Not only does it stifle our freedom of expression, the censoring of the free marketplace of ideas encourages a static and unmoving society rather than a society that is progress. Perhaps you've heard about a couple of recent defections from the Christian faith by famous people. Author and pastor Joshua Harris, who wrote I Kissed Dating Goodbye, has decided that he is no longer a Christian, and he has decided that he wants to divorce his wife. Now, let me ask you this: is there potential for offense in that act? If someone says, well, Josh Harris left the faith, maybe I'll leave too. I think there's great potential for offense here, and God's not okay with that. Hillsong worship leader Marty Sampson has recently said the same thing. I'm leaving Christianity and I'm okay with that. But God's not. And if you create an offense, if you lead someone away from Christianity, what the Bible says is it would be better for you to have a millstone tied around your neck and thrown into the ocean. So be careful. Be careful when you lead people away. Matthew 18:7 again says, woe to the world because of things that cause people to fall into the sin of unbelief. Such things must come, but woe to the person who does them. We should never offend in the sense of leading someone into sin. God is not okay with it. So far what we've looked at is we've seen how we've gotten here as a culture, and we've talked about these two biblical concepts of stumbling or falling into a trap. How do we deal with the idea? So let's just kind of localize it down and talk about us as a church. How do we as believers deal with the idea of offense? Well, we're going to look at Romans 14, which is the big chapter about how to get along in the church. One of them. In Romans chapter 14, you remember we talked a little bit about this. The Apostle Paul wrote an entire letter to be published and propagated in the city of Rome, where there is a church filled with Jews and Gentiles. Jews and Gentiles are very different people. What do Jews eat? Only the clean, kosher food. What do Gentiles eat?
Anything they
Everything.
want to.
Everything. It's good to be a Gentile, right? They eat everything. And so you bring these two groups of people through Christ into one new entity in the church, and how do they get along? How do they have fellowship around the table? How do they love one another? Well, Romans 14 is all about different convictions. And so Paul's going to give them practical instruction about how to deal with people whose convictions are different than yours. A conviction is a strong belief about which one is fully convinced. It's not something that you're waffling on. It's something you believe is true, but you recognize that the Bible may not be perfectly clear about it. In Romans, the two big issues in chapter 14 are the respecting of days. Some people practiced the Sabbath, some people didn't. And the eating of meat. And you and I think, meat, what's wrong with meat? No big deal. But in the ancient world, specifically in the very pagan city of Rome, how did you get meat? Well, they brought animals into the city to a pagan temple where they were sacrificed to a pagan god and then sold in the marketplace. And so the Jewish Christians would never eat something that had been sacrificed in a pagan temple. For them, it was a serious violation of their conscience. The Gentiles had grown up eating this meat, and they're like, hey, meat, right? And so how do you put these two together around one table? That's the issue that Romans 15 is intended to do. And so Paul breaks out these people into two different categories, and don't get misled by the words. He calls them strong and weak. The person who is weak is the person who has a conscience that is very sensitive, and this is a good thing. They don't want to offend God. They don't want to cause anyone to fall into sin, and so they're concerned that they not eat the wrong thing. On the other hand, the person who is strong, they have fewer convictions. They know the idol is nothing. The meat is a necessity in the ancient world. And so because it was offered to nothing, there's nothing wrong with it. And so they're going to have a ham sandwich. And so he calls these people strong and weak, but neither is bad. Because both are brother and sister in Christ. And so these convictions are going to create tensions. How do we deal with it? Chapter 14, verse 3 says this, the one who eats everything must not treat with contempt the one who does not. And the one who does not eat everything must not judge the one who does, for God has accepted it. And so strong and weak are two brothers and sisters in one new church. And Paul says very clearly to the strong, don't condemn your brother for his convictions, even if he is weak. And he says to the weak, hey, don't you judge your brother. This is an area of conviction. It's not an area where the Bible clearly says thou shalt not. Okay. 14:13 says this, therefore let us stop passing judgment on one another, believers with different convictions. Instead, make up your mind not to put any stumbling block or obstacle, any cause to sin in the way of a brother or sister. If violating one's conscience is a sin, then you should never violate your conscience, ever. And your convictions are yours. You have them for good reasons. You've thought about them. Maybe you're willing to view them again and think about them again, but they are your convictions. Don't violate your convictions. And don't encourage another believer to violate their convictions. At the same time, it's not a sin issue. And so view someone who has a different conviction in a way that is kind and loving. There are some instances where the stronger needs to set aside their liberties for the sake of loving their brother who is weaker. Because nobody wants to cause anybody else to sin. That would be offensive by definition. Our first option is that the stronger brother has much more room to change from the weaker brother. But there are times where the weaker brother just needs to respond lovingly and kindly. At the same bachelor party that I referred to, no, different party. Different wedding at the bachelor party, which featured things like, hey guys, we're going to do this, we're going to have paintball, we're going to have a steak dinner, and we're going to feature adult beverages at the steak dinner, and then we're going to go to a comedy club and listen to comedy, right? It wasn't, that clean Christian comedian, it was, I don't remember who. And so this was the plan for the evening, and my friend Steve invited all of his friends from seminary. Seminarians are a very diverse bunch. You have guys who are training for the pastorate. Some of them come from different backgrounds. Some of them are truck drivers. You just never know what you're going to do. And so Steve was very clear that this is the plan for the evening, and he invited our very conservative friend Brian to join us. Now, Brian, I love this guy. He is disciplined. He loves the Lord. He is passionate. He doesn't touch a drop of alcohol, and he does not listen to foul language if he can possibly avoid it. And he's invited to this bachelor party. Now, according to Romans 14, he's the weaker brother, but the reality of it is this guy is a strong Christian who loves the Lord. On the other side, there are the stronger brothers who have different convictions. How do you get all these guys together in a way that they can all have fun and enjoy the evening? Well, Brian came out for paintball, and Brian was able to stay for dinner. He did not partake, nor did I. I didn't partake in paintball because I had to go to work on Monday, and I'm old. And then Brian said, hey, you know what, I'm not gonna go to the comedy show with you guys. And you know what he didn't do? He didn't do this. Because he knew it was a matter of conviction. It was his conviction, his deeply held belief that before the Lord, he should not go to that kind of venue. And the other guys didn't have that same conviction. And yet these guys, they're brothers. They're close friends. They've studied Scripture together. They labored through Hebrew and got beaten up by that moment. I love all these guys. Right? And so the idea that we can get along together in the church is a biblical idea. The idea that we can have different convictions and yet still serve one Lord is a biblical idea. Because convictions start conversations. Hey, why do you do that? Oh, I do this because I feel like the Bible gives me the liberty to do this. Oh, I've never thought of it that way. Now, obviously, if it's a sin issue, if I was to tell my wife, hey, honey, I realize that you've got this conviction that I should only have one wife. However, I've got a conviction that says I should have two wives. What's going to happen?
Does she do laundry?
If you didn't hear that, she said, does she do laundry? You're not helping.
Sorry. Just
She buried me in the backyard, right? Exactly. That's not an area of conviction, that's an area of sin. Can you sin?
No.
No. Especially not big ones like that. I know I've asked, but she's good. What are some areas of conviction? You know, in the 1600s, the pietists came up with lists of things that you can't do. August Hermann Franke said, no laughing. Because you are always supposed to have a sober demeanor as if you were standing in the presence of God.
I can laugh there.
Well, you've already laughed several times today. Perhaps we need to talk about repentance. It's a conviction. It's a little nutty. It's 1600s. It's a little bit wrong. But convictions should start the conversation. Debbie? Pray for our dear sister. Convictions start conversations. We can have different convictions and the same love for a wonderful God that appreciates that we're different people. But when the Bible says that something is sin, there's not a conversation there except one that says, hey, that's wrong. Convictions start conversations, or at least they should. So going back to my friend, it would be offensive for the other Christians to insist that my friend drink, or offensive to pressure him to go to the comedy show. Hey, come on, Brian, don't be lame. That's wrong. Hey, Brian, I respect your convictions, and we'll do something together. I'll call you for coffee this week, something like that. That's how we should respond. Convictions start conversations. The words for offense in the Bible are used for something different than the modern concept of offense. And in some ways, the response we should have to a real offense, that it needs to stop now, is being misapplied to situations where it's just a matter of impoliteness. If I'm impolite to you, what should I do? I'm sorry, I did not mean to be impolite. And what's your response? I'm going to boycott you, burn you down, drag you through the mud? No. An offense is a big deal. being impolite is something we can work through and should be able to work through, even with people outside the faith. We've been using the word for offense in a wrong way. The majority use of that word from a biblical perspective is to lead one into sin, where the modern use means I'm insulted or bothered or peeved. And so how do we create a different community that has the ability to dialogue without being offended? I think we make a distinction between the things we don't like and the things that are truly offensive, things that lead to sin. Redefine offended and use it correctly, especially when you use the Bible. Replace it with honest, open conversation, particularly between believers of different convictions. It's okay to have a different opinion. And if we can model that as a community, if we can model a safe place, safe space, in a very real way, that we can talk about things without everybody getting bent out of shape and getting mad, then the world's going to say, what's different about you crazy people who all think differently and yet still get along? I was reminded of a story where Vice President Mike Pence, this isn't a political point, he attended a showing of Hamilton on Broadway. He was booed by the crowd, and he was addressed directly by one of the actors during the curtain. And he didn't react. He said, I wasn't offended. I nudged my kids and reminded them that's what freedom sounds like. Well, man, if that's what freedom sounds like in public discourse in the United States of America, what about the freedom we have in Christ? The freedom that where God, by the death of His Son on the cross, creates one new family where we are brothers and sisters. Wow, that's an incredible relationship context where we can talk about things we don't agree with. I've had people say to me sometimes, hey, I don't want to offend you, but here's my opinion. And I just keep thinking, wow, you're going to have to try harder.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to have to really up your game to take me all the way. For you to cause me to sin, I'm going to fight that tooth and nail. But for you to have an opinion that I don't like, please tell me your opinions. I like opinions. I don't always agree with them, but I certainly do enjoy hearing them. We work hard to avoid placing any barrier between some person and their life of faith before God. If it's a person who hasn't come to faith, we try to make sure we're not putting any barriers in the way to get them to the point where they can understand who Jesus is and what He's done for them. That's one of the most important things we can do. And if it's a person who is a believer, we would do everything, we bend over backwards to have a conversation so that we don't create any barriers, so that we don't violate any of their convictions, so that we don't drag them to a place they don't want to go and try to make them do something that would violate their conscience. Because people we meet, everyone is created in God's image, and God values everyone. And so our response is to be of love and kindness. We'll go back all the way to the beginning of this where we talked about Colossians. Let your conversation always be full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer it. As the guys get ready for the offerings, the praise team comes up. Let's pray together. Father, I just ask that you help us never cause anyone to not believe you. Help us, Lord, to encourage the right things, to encourage people to do and say and believe in your Son, Jesus. I thank you, Lord, for the opportunity to think about these words and to think about how they walk around in Scripture. And so, Lord, build into us the ability to walk around our world, not looking for ways to be offended and not looking for ways to offend, not looking for ways to be insulted, not looking for ways to insult, but, Father, to speak kindly and graciously to everyone. And Lord, we exalt you. We lift up the name of your Son, Jesus. Lord, help us to profess them. And help us to create the community of faith, the people that you want us to be in Christ's name.